The containment breach alarm had been screaming for 40 seconds before anyone thought to check on the human. Professor Valeth, 3 of the Korhai Academy of Xenobiological Studies, pressed herself flat against the corridor wall, her forearms folded tight across her thorax. Her sensory frills collapsed in pure survival response. Every other student in the building had already evacuated. The emergency protocol was clear, the drills were quarterly, and no species in the galaxy needed to be told twice what to do when a Velkthar broke its restraints. No species except, apparently, humans. "Where is the exchange student?" she hissed into her communicator. "Where is Kim J1? The security officer on the other end paused. Bioscan shows him still in Laboratory 7. He hasn't moved. Valeth, 3 felt the cold certainty of disaster settle over her. She had 40 years of teaching experience. She had supervised students from 19 different species. She had never lost one. She was not going to start today with a human who had apparently decided that a rampaging apex predator from the etheric waste was someone else's problem. She began moving toward Laboratory 7. Kim J1 had not stayed behind because he was brave. He had stayed behind because when the alarm triggered, he had been in the middle of feeding the Velkthar, and it seemed rude to just leave. The creature was enormous, the size of a small vehicle, armored in overlapping plates of natural chitin, with 6 limbs built for tearing and a skull that could shatter reinforced duraglass. Its species had no name for itself. The Korhai called it Velkthar, which translated loosely as the thing that ends things. They were used in certain military capacities on 3 different worlds. They were not, under any circumstances, supposed to be in a university xenobiology lab. The administration had approved the research project anyway. The funding was significant. The restraint system had not been. J1 stood very still in the center of the laboratory as the Velkthar moved around him. Not at him. Around him. Its 6 legs clicked softly against the floor tiles, a sound weirdly delicate for something that had just torn a reinforced containment wall apart, with its forelimbs like it was peeling fruit. The creature was doing what it always did when he came to feed it, circling, testing the air, running its sensory organs over every surface of the space as though confirming what it already knew. He was here. The space was otherwise empty. This was acceptable. J1 exhaled slowly and set the feeding tray down on the floor. He had learned 3 weeks ago not to approach the feeding station directly. The Velkthar preferred to come to the food on its own terms. It had taken him 2 weeks of quiet observation to figure that out. The posted research notes hadn't mentioned it. The previous student researchers, he suspected, had never been still enough to notice. "Okay," he said softly. Not to the creature, exactly. Not to himself, either. Just to the air. "The wall's gone. That's a problem." The Velkthar paused in its circuit. Its sensory cluster, a dense mass of chemoreceptors and vibration organs along its upper thorax, rotated toward him. It made a sound low in its body, a subsonic resonance that J1 felt more in his sternum than heard with his ears. He had learned that sound too. It wasn't aggression. It was closer to acknowledgement. "Yeah," he said. "I know." Professor Valeth, 3 reached the laboratory corridor and stopped. The outer door to Laboratory 7 was open, not breached. Open, in the ordinary way, on its ordinary hinges. Through the reinforced observation window set into the adjacent wall, she could see the interior clearly. The containment wall was destroyed. Rubble was scattered across half the room. The Velkthar, the creature that had reportedly taken 17 trained military handlers to transport to this facility, was moving freely through the space. It was not attacking anything. It was eating. The human student was sitting cross-legged on the floor 3 meters away, watching it eat, with the particular quality of stillness that Valeth, 3 had observed in him before and never quite known how to categorize. He wasn't frozen. He wasn't even tense. He looked like someone who had decided that this was where he was going to be right now, and he was comfortable with that decision. The Velkthar finished eating. It moved toward the human. Valeth 3's hand went to her emergency transmitter. Every instinct she possessed told her to trigger it, to call the containment team, to do something, but her hand stopped before it completed the motion. Because the creature hadn't lunged. It had lowered its head. It lowered its enormous, armored, weapon-equipped head to within half a meter of the human student's face, and it made that subsonic sound, the one that the research notes logged as unclassified vocalization, possible stress indicator, and the human said something too quiet to hear through the glass. And then, slowly, with the particular deliberateness of something that understood what it was doing, the Velkthar settled itself on the floor beside him. Around him, more precisely. It arranged its 6 limbs in a posture that Valeth 3 had seen in research imagery before, the defensive configuration of a Velkthar protecting its young. The human reached out and rested one hand on the creature's armored flank. The Velkthar did not react. It simply breathed. Valeth 3 stood in the corridor for a long moment, her frills still and her thoughts entirely reorganized. Then she took out her communicator. Security, stand down the emergency response team. A pause. Professor, the containment breach is not a threat. Send a structural repair crew for the east wall of Laboratory 7. And bring me a chair. They stayed like that for another hour. Jaewon didn't try to explain it later. Not in any way that satisfied the review board, anyway. He told them what he had observed, that the Velkthar responded poorly to direct eye contact, preferably to lateral approach, consistently better to silence than to speech. That it had shown from the beginning a marked preference for his presence over that of other researchers, possibly because he moved slowly, possibly because he didn't carry the particular stress chemical signature that seemed to irritate it. That when it had broken free, it had oriented immediately toward him, not the exits. He told them he didn't think it had broken free to escape. He thought it had broken free because the wall was between it and something it considered its responsibility. The review board found this deeply implausible and recommended the Velkthar be transferred to a secure military facility. Professor Valeth 3 counter-recommended that the research continue, with revised containment protocols, an upgraded facility, and Kim Jae-won designated as primary handler. The argument lasted 3 months. Valeth 3-1. The new facility was larger. The containment was better, not because anyone believed it would be necessary, but because regulations required it, and Jae-won saw no reason to fight the regulations. He still brought the food himself. He still sat on the floor. The Velkthar still circled, still tasted the air, still confirmed in its own way that everything was as it should be. Other students came to observe now. They stood behind the new observation glass, speaking in low voices, watching. Some of them came back a second time. A few came back many times, and Valeth 3 noticed that the ones who came back were learning something, though they wouldn't have been able to name what it was. They were learning to be still. They were learning that stillness communicated something that movement and noise and urgency could not. They were learning, without quite knowing they were learning it, that presence, simple, quiet, consistent presence, was its own kind of language. Jae-won would have told them, if they'd asked, that he hadn't done anything special. He'd just paid attention, and then he'd stayed. The Velkthar would have told them something different, if it had words for it. Not that the human was brave, or clever, or strong. Those qualities didn't register on the axes it used to measure things. It would have said that he was constant, that he came back, that he sat in the same place and breathed the same way and never tried to be something other than what he was. In the language of the etheric wastes, where everything that mattered had to earn that status through time and presence alone, that was the only definition of kin that existed. The human had earned it without knowing he was trying. That, the Velkthar understood, was perhaps the most honest way it could happen.